Hey everybody, my name is Mr. Francy and welcome or welcome back to Mr. Francy Reads. Okay, so today I am going to be doing my CSL number 7, that is my completed SAS list number 7, which is the Damienverse by Ian Rob Wright. For those who are new to my CSL list, this is a series that I'm doing where every time I complete a series on my SAS list, I do a review of that entire series. For those of you wondering, a SAS list was originated by, this SAS list was originated by Elizabeth from Lizzie Faye Loves Books. It was an idea that she came up with where readers can come up with a number of series that they place onto a list and they work their way through that list throughout the course of the year. And the acronym of SAS, SAS, stands for Serious About Series. Now that you know all that, the 8th series that I completed on my SAS list was the Damienverse series by Ian Rob Wright. A little bit of information before we go into more detail. As an overview, this is a series of horror books that connect in a universe. So what I mean by that is that these aren't books that necessarily continue on from one another. They are all standalones, very much so in a way, but they connect because they are all set in the same universe. So different characters, one universe, and we have a man by the name of Damien who pops up here and there in at least 2 of the books, so I guess that's where Ian Rob Wright came up with the name. So it really doesn't matter what book you read or in what order, or if you just want to pick up one book. It really doesn't matter. And to make my point on that, I actually did not know about this series until I picked up the 4th and final book in the series, reading it as a standalone and not knowing it was part of a series. And then I went back and read books 1, 2, and 3. So in reading order, I read book 4, then book 1, then book 2, then book 3. But today I'm going to discuss them with you in book order. Okay, so let's get right on into it. So I'm going to start off by giving you the vital stats, including the age rating and genre and my star rating. So let's begin. Okay, so the first book in this series is Sam, again by Ian Rob Wright, they all are. And this is an adult horror, and I gave this book 5 stars. The second book is Asbo, and I gave, again, an adult horror, I gave it 4 stars. The third book is Final Winter, and I gave that book 5 stars. And the 4th and final book is The Housemates, and I gave that book also 5 stars. Alright, so let's start off with book number 1. I don't know if I'm going to be doing a spoiler section in this review or not, but if I do, I will put a spoiler tag up on the screen. For the meantime, though, it's going to be spoiler free. Alright, so book 1, Sam. The premise of this book is that it's omniscient narration, but we follow 2 main characters, Angela and Tim. Angela is a retired priest and Tim is a scientist. Jessica hires both of them to assist her with her son. He's been doing some really odd things lately, and Jessica doesn't know if it is something human or more. So she sets Tim and Angela to their work to finally, once and for all, uncover the truth about Sam. So to my thoughts on the book, and I enjoyed this book. So, yeah. 2 things stopped me from giving the full 5-star rating, because I gave it 4.5 stars, but those 2 things were it had a very slow beginning, and also I was failing to see the connection between the housemates, which I'd read before this one, and this book. So while I do get that this is book 1 and The Housemates is book 4, they're both part of the same series known as the Damienverse. Damien features as our main character in book 4, but he's not in this one. Also, I listened to this as an audiobook, and I have to say the narrator did an amazing job. It was truly a great honor, and I recommend all horror fans to this book as well as all the others in the series. So what else can I say to expand upon that? Yeah, so obviously, Jessica, being Sam's mother, is rather concerned about him, and so she hires the 2 main characters, Angela and Tim, to work out what's going on. There are multiple twists that occur throughout this book, and I really don't want to give away spoilers, so all I will say is that Ian Rob Wright is absolutely amazing when it comes to horrors. Well, that's in my opinion, because I learned very early on, I was fortunate enough to reach out to another horror author that I had read from, which was Sean Horton, who wrote the book Cenote, which I loved. It's a novella, and I do highly recommend checking that one out as well. And I was praising Sean Horton in the message that I had sent to him, because he had written horror in a way that I felt horror ought to be written. And Mr. Horton wrote back to me and said, well, horror is subjective. Different people think about what they define horror to be differently. And he really allowed me to take an internal look at why I felt that horror should be boxed as a certain thing, compared to what Mr. Horton had opened my eyes to see, which is it is subjective. Different people view it to be different things. So to save time, my view on a horror is that for a good horror, a horror that works and is presented incredibly well, for me, it needs to do one of four things. It needs to either freak me out, creep me out, gross me out, convince me to leave the light on, or convince me that I'm going to have a nightmare. If it doesn't do at least one of those things, then to me, it's not necessarily going to be a good horror book. So I've read, and this is going to be a very minor tangent I'm going to go on here. I've read a couple of Stephen King books, and while I loved Misery, I thought it was fantastic. The other Stephen King book that I read really didn't present as a horror to me. And I've read some other horrors along the way that just didn't present as a horror to me under the dot points that I need, the requirements that I have for it to qualify as a horror, let alone a good horror. As I say, if it does one of the things that I want a horror to do, then to me it qualifies as a horror. If it does all of them, then it is an amazing horror in my view. And with this one, with Sam, it... how do I put this? Sam, to me, read as a light horror. There were some elements in the book that I found to be creepy, especially towards the end. However, the first 3/4 of the book, to me, didn't scare me, even one iota. I just found it to be more weird. As you'll know, because I've told you what the premise is, we're trying to work out what the heck is going on with Sam and why Sam is acting really weird at the moment. So it's more, reads like a mystery in a way. What the heck is going on with Sam? Let's try and work it out. Then the final climax occurs, and that's where all the horror took place for me. So, look, I gave it 4.5 stars. I think that Ian Rob Wright is talented, but I think that this was just the tamest of all the 4 books that I had read. So, yeah, not much really else to say there. If I were to do a spoiler section, I would talk more here about the reveal and the twist at the end. So the reveal about what actually was going on with Sam, but I'll keep it spoiler free. I was very surprised by the reveal of what was going on with Sam. And as for the twist at the end, there was a twist that, oh my gosh, my jaw dropped to the floor with the twist. Yeah, so obviously I'm not going to mention what the twist was to keep it spoiler free, but I definitely did not expect it. And it made for a really good ending. So as I was saying earlier, I ultimately ended up giving this book 4.5 stars. And I think a lot of that came down to the final quarter. An amazing horror book, and another, after I'd already read The Housemates, another amazing Ian Rob Wright work. So do highly recommend, especially if you don't mind having a slow beginning and then, working up to an amazing climax. It was really well done. All right, so the second book in the series is called Asbo. And again, Asbo is an adult horror written by Ian Rob Wright, and I gave this book a total of 4 stars. Okay, so the premise of this one is ASBO is an acronym that stands for Antisocial Behavioral behavior order. And in this book, we follow Andrew, though it's more of an omniscient narration style, but Andrew is the main character. Andrew has a wife and child. One day, Andrew goes out to buy some fish and chips for his family. On the way there, he comes across Frankie and his gang of misfits. Frankie asks Andrew a question: "Can you buy me a pack of smokes?" Andrew thinks nothing of it and doesn't buy him smokes, but it's the denial of this request that changes the course of Andrew's life forever. So, to my thoughts, keeping it spoiler free, this is quintessential Ian Rob Wright in every way, shape, and form. I remember getting to a point early on in the book and thinking, whoa, that's a lot for a book. And then a moment later it hit me, oh yeah, it's a horror. What defines Ian Rob Wright for me is his ability to hit the nail on the head with his chosen genre. And as I've already told you, for me, horror must either creep me out, freak me out, make me want to leave the light on, or convince me I'm going to have a nightmare. But Ian Rob Wright does this with every single book that I had read of his up until this point. Is it creepy and unnerving? Yes. Is it horrific and gross? Yes. Is it really scary? Yes. Why? It's a horror. This, as with his other horror books, are what horror books should be, and I was so happy that I had found Ian Rob Wright by this point. So, yeah, I do have some spoilers that I want to discuss with this book, so let's quickly put a spoiler tag up on the screen. If you don't want to be spoiled for this book, then continue sliding along until you see the spoiler tag erase. I'm not spoiling any of the other books at this stage, just Asbo. Okay, so to the spoilers. Okay, so let's start with a big one, the ending. I called it early on. I knew Davy would ultimately be the one to finish off Frankie. Just seemed like it was leading to this point all along. Either that, or I've just gotten used to Ian Rob Wright as an author, so either way. The occurrences in Andrew's home were quintessential horror, and I really appreciated that. The moment that where I was saying that this is too much for a horror book, for a book, was the shower scene where that woman was scalded to death. Bless Ian Rob Wright, as this is horror. In any other genre, you'd say this is too much, but that's why adult horror exists. It's also so the author can go there. That being said, the scared of the neighbor thing did hit a little close to home for me. We've had some issues in my place with a neighbor, but anyway. But again, with this being a horror, that worked even more. So yeah, really, really, really enjoyed this book overall. Let's take the spoiler tag off the screen. Yeah, so this one is not the most horrific book of the four, but it's certainly the second most horrific book. So if you're after a real horror, yeah, pick this up. This is horrific to the umpteenth degree. It was done really, really, really well. Not everyone's a fan of horror, but for me, when I go into a horror, I want it to be horrific, and this definitely was. So I gave it a total of 4 stars. All right, so the third book in this series is called Final Winter. Let's put it up on the screen. And I gave this book a total of 5 stars. So the premise of this book is that we follow a medium cast of characters, but the main ones seem to be Harry, Jerry, Jessica, Damien, and Steph. Harry and some other guys, including Damien, start off this book. They're in a pub drinking while Steph is the barkeep. And a weather lady is telling everyone that this is the worst winter ever. Not only in England, but in the entire world, it is snowing everywhere. Not too much later, the power goes out, not only in the pub, but also in the grocery store Jessica works at, and also at the DVD store Jerry is at. Somehow everyone winds up together at the pub, but that's just the beginning. From there, mysterious things start to happen, and it begs the question, is there more going on here than meets the eye? So, to my thoughts, I won't lie, this book had a slow start that seemed to last a while, but if you pick up this book, trust me, get through the slow beginning. It's literally allowing you to get to know the characters more. From the moment the action begins, it's a wild ride to the end, with an epic twist that knocked me off my feet. Ian Rob Wright deserves more credit than he gets. So, I just thought that this was absolutely fantastic, and Ian Rob Wright is a horror star in my opinion. And if you are looking to pick up some true adult horror books, then you really can't go past his ones. All right, let's put a spoiler tag up on the screen for Final Winter. This will just be spoilers for Final Winter. Okay, so let's talk about the twist because it's the elephant in the room. Oh my gosh, I absolutely loved it. So when we started off with this book and how we had Ben, Jerry, and the other girl who I've momentarily forgotten her name, and they're being tracked down by that hooded figure who ends up killing Ben. I was like, oh, okay, this is fine, I guess, but I've seen so much worse with Ian Rob Wright. Worse for a standard book, but that what I mean by that is better for horror. So I've seen so much more horrific things from Ian Rob Wright than this. So I thought maybe this is going to be a bit tame for a book. But then as you keep reading, as you know, if you've read the book, and if you haven't read the book, then if you keep reading, you find out what is going on. And the spoiler is this. Okay, so the hooded figure is not the only hooded figure out there. There are many, and they turn out to be angels sent down by God. God is pissed. God has had enough, and God is saying, I'm done. The world is over, and I'm going to kill all the humans. And the reason why is because our main character in this large cast of characters, Harry, committed a sin by killing a man. Now, the man that he killed created a car accident. Harry and his wife and 2 children were in a car together. Oh, yeah, I think he has 2 children. Anyway, they're in his car and they end up in a car accident. His wife and children, Harry's wife and children, die because a man committed an accident. So Harry wasn't doing anything wrong. He was not the one at fault, but he was the only one to survive. Enraged by it and, just his life turning upside down because he no longer has his wife and children, he seeks revenge on the guy who he was in the accident with, who caused the death of his wife and 2 children, and kills him, obviously committing a sin of killing someone. And this was the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back. God is done. God wants to get rid of all of the humans on Earth because he's convinced, whatever, God is convinced that all the humans are sinners and is done. So wants to eradicate the world of all the humans. So we find this out because there is a guy, I think his name is Luke, who is at the pub, who is an Irishman, and he seems to be a great guy because he's trying to help everyone. But then we find out towards the end that Luke is actually Lucifer, and Lucifer ends up explaining to Harry what's going on and why God is upset and all that stuff that I just explained to you all. And Harry ultimately decides that, okay, I get it. So he goes to the angels to make a deal with them and says, take me to the worst place, the worst part of heaven, the worst part of hell imaginable, which is called the abyss. He actually asked Luke, where is the worst part of hell? And Luke said, it's called the abyss. So Matt says to the hooded angel, who ends up being the angel of Michael, saying to Michael, take me to the abyss, but let me make a deal with you. Take me to the worst possible place in hell, to the abyss, but let the other humans survive, because it's not fair that they're all being judged for my sin. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Ultimately, God takes that as an act of pure humanity, and therefore humanity gets to survive because of the deal that Harry. I don't know why I'm calling him Matt. That Harry tried to make, and even Harry gets to survive. And it seems like he's going to turn his life around, because we get in the final chapter Harry doing a do-over, very much reminiscent of like Ebenezer Scrooge, but in a horror format. So ultimately gave it 5 stars. It was a very, very, very slow start, but the ending was amazing. Let's take the spoiler tag off the screen as we get into the 4th and final book in this series that I could gush about all day long, The Housemates by Ian Rob Wright. This is what started everything for me, and as I said at the beginning of the video, I started off reading The Housemates thinking it was a standalone. Then I found out it was the 4th and final book in a series. That's why I went back and read books 1, 2, and 3. So let's talk about the premise of this book. So in The Housemates by Ian Rob Wright, actually my star rating first of all, which is an overwhelming 5 stars. For this one. So in this book, we follow a man by the name of Damien. So yes, that is the Damien from The Final Winter. He was a side character in The Final Winter. He steps up in this book to become the main character. So we follow Damien, who becomes one of 12 housemates in a horror version of Big Brother, All 12 housemates are placed into a house and have no idea what's going to happen, except for the fact that someone will be eliminated every day and that there will be challenges. However, they soon all begin to find out that there is more to this game than they realize. People start to die, and everyone begins to realize that this game is more a game of literal life and death. So, looking at the book objectively, being someone who always wants to know the age rating and genre of every single book I read before I go into it, I was well aware that this book was an adult horror. Knowing that it was a horror, I had certain expectations going into it, including, as I've already said many times in this video, that it needs to gross me out, freak me out, creep me out, and make me leave the light on and convince me I'm going to have a nightmare. So, this book actually ticked every single one of those objectives. So based solely on an objective look of did this book hit the brief, my answer 100% is yes. Ian Rob Wright took every single opportunity that he could to gross me out and never ever failed. Regarding freaking me out, he absolutely did this with every twist and turn that occurred in the story. Did he convince me that I was going to have a nightmare? Not necessarily, but I think that was more because I made the smart decision to read this book during the day. Had this been the last thing I read before I went to bed at night, for sure I would have been convinced I would have had nightmares, and I would have forced myself to leave the light on. So based on my own criteria alone, looking at it objectively, Ian Rob Wright deserves an overwhelming 5 stars. But now let's take a look at this book subjectively, aka emotionally. This book is by far and away the single best horror I've ever read. I've been looking for the longest time to find a horror that has a game stitched throughout it. As someone who took a very, very, very long time to finally be able to watch the Saw movies and then finally binge through them, the idea of reading a horror that had a game in it always intrigued me. The book I picked up before this book I thought was going to be that book, and I was incredibly disappointed when I found out it was not. Then to come across this book, where we literally have housemates fighting in a competition to literally keep themselves alive, was exactly what I was looking for. Now, I am someone who has read an eclectic amount of genres and age ratings in my life. When it comes to horrors, I generally find them to be rather boring. I mean, nothing really excites me about some guy grabbing a knife and stabbing people 50 times and reading about how the blood oozed out. I guess I'm just someone who prefers the excitement of sitting on the edge of my seat with a thriller as opposed to a horror. If someone is going to die in an incredibly obvious way, and then we're left with 5 or so pages of how it's descriptively describing how the person died and getting a perfect image in our mind, to me, I find that to be incredibly boring. But this book takes the excitement of a thriller with real consequences, and then while we're on the edge of our seat, continues to keep us there with the gross imagery. We know from the off that someone is going to die every single day, but the way in which each person died was extremely creative, and Ian Rob Wright needs to be credited for that. I won't give away spoilers, but I will say that there is a twist that occurs at the end of the book. For those of you who know what this twist is, I'm sure you'll agree with me that it was one of the most insanely good twists that I've ever read. While for a lot of the book, especially with the games, I found myself cringing at just how disgusting the imagery was, when it came to the final twist, my jaw was on the floor. If I were to be extremely nitpicky, I would say that there is one question that I have for Ian Rob Wright that I want to have answered because it just doesn't make sense. But even with that question being unanswered at the time of me doing the review, the book is still overwhelmingly deserving of the 5 stars that it was given. My advice for any reader potentially considering picking up this book is know the genre that you're going into. This is a horror, not only a horror, but an adult horror. Expect extremely graphic imagery, expect extremely jaw-dropping, terrifying ways in which people will die, but also expect for there to be a reason behind why this is happening that actually makes the book make sense. It is one thing to have 20 people die in a book in the most horrific and graphic way, but when the death doesn't make any sense, it can leave the reader with a lot of questions as to the motivation of the killer. Please know that this book leaves no stone unturned. Because of this, it makes everything that is going on make sense and also has you on the edge of your seat as you're reading it the entire way through. The words unputdownable are thrown a lot around these days, but this book definitely was that and more for me. The idea of stopping reading this book at any point seemed to me to be an idea that was more torturous than anything that was going on in the book, which should give you an idea of just how gripping it actually is. Thank you, Ian Rob Wright, for writing the single best horror horror book I've ever read. An overwhelmingly 5 stars from me. I simply cannot wait to read more from this amazing author. Yes, that is a gush review and a half, but it deserves it. Even having read books 1, 2, and 3 after book 4, I can still say The Housemates by Ian Rob Wright is the single best horror I have ever read. And after reading all of the books in this series, Sam, Asbo, Final Winter, and The Housemates, I 100% trust Ian Rob Wright, and best believe I'm going to be reading a ton more of his works and talking about them on this channel. If you are looking for horrors that are going to creep you out, freak you out, gross you out, convince you you're going to have a nightmare, and force you to want to leave the light on because of that incoming nightmare that you're concerned about, then these are the books you need to read. Ian Rob Wright is an absolute master at writing horror, or at the very least writing the type of horror that I want to read, that is going to keep you on the edge of your seat each and every time a horror element does come up. I cannot highly recommend him enough. I know that horror is probably one of the least most popular genres when it comes to reading, and that's because I think a lot of readers probably would prefer to watch horror films rather than read them, and that's probably because it's hard to scare a lot of readers when it comes to reading horrors. But if you want to be scared, this is what you read. You read Ian Rob Wright stuff. No offense, Mr. Stephen King, but in my opinion, take off that crown and hand it to Ian Rob Wright, because this guy is incredible. Yes, he crosses every single line that he possibly can, but he can do that because he's writing adult horror. So it makes sense. The guy was born to write adult horror, and I cannot gush about this series any more than I have. It is incredible, and I can't wait to read more of his works, and I will be very, very, very soon. Before you probably even assume I will, you'll see another Ian Rob Wright book on this channel. But that is where I am going to leave it for this review of the Damienverse series. If you have any comments, thoughts, and or questions, or anything you want to add about your own experience of reading this series, or any thoughts, comments, or questions you have about going into the series that I haven't answered here, please do not hesitate to let me know in the comments section below. But in the meantime, that is where I am going to leave it, so I'm going to let you all go with peace, blessings, and so much love. Please do be kind and love one another, and spread your sparkling energy all throughout the world. And until next time, happy reading. Bye, everyone.